So welcome everyone to the Battleground States Matrix webinar. This meeting is being recorded and will be put on the Olympia Indivisible YouTube channel. Please stay muted. Pop any questions you have into the chat, and then at the end, after the presentation, there'll be a Q&A session. And next up is Mary.
That was so fast. I thought there was going to be more things from Meg. Um, okay, so I'm Mary, and I helped organize the Washington State convening, and as part of that, I was strongly encouraged to include these guys. I thought initially it was going to be Kevin, but it ended up being James, um, to present on their work regarding the Battlegrounds States Matrix, where they assess different elections and they try and figure out which ones people should be spending money and time on. Uh, I'm as guilty as anybody. I don't like Mitch McConnell, and when Amy McGrath was running against him, I sent much money, and that was just, I could have just lit it up and burnt it in my hand and had just as much impact on that race. And so that's really what these guys do. And they and their team have developed a great tool. And that's what we're here to learn about so that we all have limited time and we all have limited money. And it's really important to figure out where you can target your efforts or target your donations so that they make a difference. So we're really happy that they are here tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Jones and James Ricard III, both from Vashon Island.
You want to kick it off, Kevin, or do you want me to?
I'm happy if you lead on, James.
Okay. Well, thank you all for giving us a little bit of your time tonight. And Mary, another shout out. I thought the convening was wonderful. I went to the 2023 conference. It was great. That was my first one. I really enjoyed the convening, and not just because Ezra was there. Not at all. Okay, so the most competitive elections is really where we focus. We want to be strategically aligned, but Mary really hit it. I view this work in large part as us being in service of other indivisible chapters and other individuals who might learn of this work. There's so much going on, particularly in an election year, and it's real easy to follow the squirrel. You know, when Georgia was having the runoff for the last two senatorial seats, or when Florida had the special election for two seats down there, everybody was like, if we get those two Florida seats, we can flip it, we'll get the House. A lot of work by people to figure out where to spend their time, their efforts, and is it the best use of their time? And so we take, if I can, Kevin can elaborate more, a little bit more of a mathematical approach to this, to looking at what are competitive races and where do we really think we have a chance. So that, is that extra postcard, is that extra $5 going to be enough to tip the scale? If there's a 30-point difference, we're not going to recommend that you go after that. Don't spend your time and energy there, because you might feel good, but it's not going to move the needle. So the last bullet here on the slide, we want to make it easy for people to use these tools and this information to help them decide where they want to spend their really very limited, precious time. And for some folks, money. Okay, next slide, Kevin. So mathematically, win margins of 5% or less. Like you said, Mary, I mean, I don't like Mitch McConnell either, but it's kind of like just hold your hand out and burn the money in your palm. So where can we make a difference? And I would assert that in 2026, we have lots of opportunities. But we want to be really strategic about where we spend our time and efforts. In the 2024 election, we were right 3/4 of the time with our recommendations. and 100% right on the US Senate. So let's go after the competitive races and don't waste our time and effort on ones where we might not make a difference. Okay, we can go to the next one. I alluded to the 2023 WIN convention conference, and we asked the group of people there, indivisible leaders from Washington State, what their priorities were, and they said, win the House, win Congress, House and the Senate, and state execs, governor, AG, secretary of state, the last one being so particularly important in elections. We've added for this year and next year what we're calling blue state trifectas, which is everything above governor, AG, secretary of state, and the state legislatures. I think Ezra and Leah are pretty consistently saying where you can make the biggest difference is locally. And so if we can help states that aren't as fortunate as we are, Kevin and I live on a blue island, we call it the blue bubble, in a blue county, in a blue state. So part of our work is about projecting it outside of Washington. So if we can help other states win the trifecta and flip legislatures where possible, then as Kevin said earlier, it helps us control the political agenda. We have the gavel, so to speak, at the local level, not just the national level. We can go on. So how do we do this work? We look at prior election results, the various race rating organizations. Cook is one example. Crowdsourcing is important to us. Even with all our research, it's not appropriate, might be too strong a word, for us to assert what we think is right for a district inside Arizona. So we want to reach out where we can to people in that district in Arizona, those indivisible groups. What are they saying? Who are they supporting? And we don't really make any determination when there's primaries. We just let the primaries run themselves. We rarely come out and make a statement about one of X number of Democrats that we would support. We look at researching volunteer opportunities. There's lots of them out there with various candidates across the country, and how can we support, whether that's phone banking, texting, postcarding, etc. Locally, canvassing. And then we communicate it. And Kevin's going to show you our Get Out, the vote page, and talk a little bit about the Take Action Network, which we use particularly when the legislature's in session here in Washington. Okay, go on to the next one. So some recent examples. We all know what happened in Wisconsin with the Supreme Court, and he who shall not be named poured about $20 million or more into Brad's conservative campaign. But Susan Crawford won, and I know here on the island we were writing postcards left and right and encouraging other people focus on Susan. And I alluded to this earlier. In Florida CD1 and CD6, we really wanted those two people to win, Gay and Josh. When you look back, how much did Trump win in those areas, in those districts? It was like 30 points, or their predecessors were Republicans. They won by 30 points. And we just didn't think that was something we could overcome. Now, both Gay and Josh did a phenomenal job, and their opponents only won by like 10 points. So the movement's in the right direction, and we'll look at what happens in 26. I mean, maybe things will change about our recommendations there. Okay, we can keep going, Kevin. Here locally, Victoria Hunt and Deb Kay trying to ensure we get both of them elected. Gosh, it's almost October, so in what, about 6 weeks? we'll have our next election. So focusing on them. And then we're encouraging people to reach out of our blue bubble. So Mickey Sherrill in New Jersey, you probably all have heard about what happened with her personal records and data being released accidentally. But we're encouraging people to reach out now to help with that blue state trifecta outside of Washington state. And then the next slide will show you, I believe, Virginia, where there are a lot of opportunities. Of course, we want to start with Abigail and Jay for governor and AG, but then there's a whole bunch of seats that are open in their legislature. So in a year where we don't have much going on here locally, Deb Kay and Hunt, how can we help people decide where to spend their time, energy, money outside of the state? How can you support these candidates? Because those are the ones that are most significant in 2025. So that's kind of how we get here, what we're recommending right now. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, unless, Kevin, you want to summarize anything I missed or misspoke?
There's just a couple of exceptions that to the rules that you laid out of our approach. You mentioned the primary election. You know, we hesitate to want to put our thumb on the scale of somebody's primary election that's not in our district. But that is why we reach out to talk to indivisible chapters across the country. We want to find out who they're supporting. And so prior to the Virginia primary, you know, we heard that Virginia indivisible chapters were all in for Abigail. So we could start right then, you know, to promote and find opportunities to support Abigail. We do tend to shy away from races where there's, say, two Democrats running. One may be preferred over the other, but you know, we feel that's kind of putting our thumb on a scale that maybe it's not really our purpose to do that as this win elections group. The other place that will change our opinion there is if an indivisible chapter says, or like all of the indivisible chapters in a certain state legislative district, this is true on the east side of Lake Washington in particular, there was a more progressive candidate running against a less progressive Democrat. And so all of those indivisible chapters were clearly for the more progressive. And we said, well, in that case, we will follow that lead and include the more progressive candidate. I think the other thing is, James, you mentioned the 5% is sort of what we call a competitive election. And so 5%, what about that number? So a couple things. One is usually the margin of error in polls is some place around 2.5 to 3%. So 5% is not super competitive race, but you know, it's basically a race that we think we can influence. We actually early on worked with state legislative Joe Fitzgibbons by name, who said that once you get a 5% margin, it can be hard to change that outcome unless we see these big swings because of people just really unhappy with the administration. You know, in that case, things can change. But the 5% number, as long as we get enough competitive races in that range, we figure that we don't want to put too many things on the menu because then, you know, people just go, oh, there's way too much here. So it's sort of this balance between, you know, how many really competitive races are there? How many of them do we think that we have an ability to influence the outcome? And then how much do we want to put out for people to consider in terms of, you know, looking for a state or a set of candidates to support? So that's maybe a little bit of some of the other considerations that go into that process that James talked about. So I don't know if there's any questions for us before I dive into some of the details. Okay, and if not, I'll do a little bit of introduction. As James mentioned, we're both from Indivisible Vashon. I'm also on the WIN steering committee. That's the Washington Indivisible Network. There was a statewide organization prior to that I was also involved with, and that's where I met my WIN steering committee colleagues actually at that time. So we started Indivisible Vashon back like May 2nd of 2017. I just looked at that date the other day. And we've been, holding that organization together since then. I'm personally a Northwest native. My Olympia roots go to my wife Susie was faculty president at South Puget Sound College. At that time, it was South Puget Sound Community College. But we've had lots of great friends in Olympia area. One of them came up to ride on a bike ride up here on Vashon Island just a couple of weeks ago. So we continue to work to build to cherish our friends in Olympia. And of course, you got an awesome place for the Capitol right there, so we can come and support your demonstrations and protests. So we hope to do more and more of that. Let's see. What I'd like to do at this point is jump out of the slides. And I'll try to do this sort of gracefully without messing up too much of the recording, but I want to go right into some details about how you can find the information that we talked about. So what we tell people is, first of all, just go out to indivisiblevashon.org. And this is what you're going to see when you're out there. And right at the very top, click here for our Get Out the Vote resources. And that, if you click there, it will take you to this page. And we're focusing on the Battleground States Matrix today, but I want to let you know that there's quite a few other things here that you might be interested in looking at. One is called this Elections Knowledge Resource, which actually Lisa Ornstein was the last person who did the editing on that. So thank you to Lisa. If you click there, if you want to do anything like phone banking or texting or sign waving or whatever, there's a list of Indivisible chapter members that have done that, and you can click right here and go and talk and find how to contact them and talk to them about what they learned and how to do that. We also have the candidates, and if Haywood is successful with initiatives, we're going to be finding ways to oppose those initiatives also. If groups do endorsement, Olympia does, you should be able to find the endorsements of your organization plus others here by clicking that link. We also have texting, because texting groups tend to go all over the place in terms of who they support. They don't always support one candidate. So oftentimes people find that, hey, I want to just do texting. I'm comfortable with an organization. They do a great job. Hopefully they support some of the candidates that we've identified, but maybe not always. But so the texting is kind of hard to sort of tie to a specific candidate. And there's a donation page if you have more money than time. And then our local postcard writing. If you click on this matrix on that screen, this is basically what you're going to see. And in the slides, by the way, I go back to those. The rest of these slides are all about the steps that you go through to do what we just said. And it shows the different parts of the matrix. So these slides are available from the convening. So that's kind of a reference, but I'll just kind of walk through it in real time and show you the latest and greatest. So what we have is a couple of different things. You'll notice that we have elections in 2025 and we have elections in 2026. In both years, we rank from the highest to the lowest priority based on the analysis that we do. We just recently added California Prop 50, by the way. So there's actually opportunities there to support them in terms of postcarding right now and phone banking. But what you're going to look at in this field out here is different rows which represent different goals. And so if I go ahead and increase the size of this so we can make it a little bit easier for your viewers to see that, we have multiple goals around what we're trying to accomplish. And this is where people have a chance to, select the goals that they most care about. Now, didn't quite do what I wanted to do here. Let me back this down a little bit. And then we'll go back up to the goals. So James mentioned blue state trifectas. That's building state legislative power. We also want to maintain judicial leadership. So that tends to we had a couple of justices like Susan Crawford, right, that we wanted to support. That's so important as we know because the judicial system is the one check on the current administration. We also wanted to focus on the U.S. Senate and the House because those were the two things that came out of the gathering that we had back in 2023, if I remember the date, and maybe 2024. And then progressive state leadership, this is where we see like governors, attorney generals, and secretaries of state. What you're seeing here in terms of this color coding is a priority structure. So we use aqua shading for the highest priority, green for the next priority, and yellow for medium priority. And as you can see the color coding right here. What you're looking at inside of these cells, for example, let's pick California. You can see there's a whole lot of, this is the House. You can see there's a whole lot of House legislative districts here. They're put in order, not numerically, but they're put in order the most competitive seat based on the last election and based on people like Cook Political Report. So if you as an activist want to support the most competitive races, we try to give you that guidance right here in the matrix. And we'll flip these around as the race changes. Also we have here is in bold font is the races that were won by less than 2.5%. And in non-bold, somewhere between 2.5 and 5. So again, you can get an idea of where are the really competitive races across the country. The other thing we do is show you who's holding the seat. So blue is an incumbent Democrat, red is an incumbent Republican. So basically in California, here's the deal. If you want to flip a seat in California, we can flip, hey, we can flip a competitive red seat in California, right? There's one red seat that's really competitive. But you know what? We also have to hold on to what, 7 blue seats. So we hope to portray not only the nature of the challenge of what seats to flip, but what seats to protect. And if you believe the assessments of people like Cook Political Report, they might say, hey, California 41, awesome flip opportunity. But you know what? California 13, 45, 27, and 47 are even more vulnerable than California 41. So we hope that this portrays to activists where they want to put their energy and why. So that's our goal. Let me go ahead and I don't know if there's any questions at this point because this is probably a good place to just check in and see if anybody has anything they'd like to ask us.
I don't have any from the chat, but I know one of our members from OI had a question about your thoughts on Zoran Mondani.
Yeah, and so that's New York's mayoral contest.
Mhm.
And but it has broader implications, I think, Meg, right, because of the fact that the Democratic Party is, really recovering from the unfortunate Trump re-election and his second presidency. And so who is stepping in, right, to create leadership around that? So a couple of things here. Our process looks at progressive candidates versus conservative candidates. And we are not part of the Democratic Party. We do not focus solely on Democrats. When we think progressive versus conservative, we think about their policy positions. And the other thing is we focus on, the races that are state executives, state legislatures, and Congress. And that is generally the indivisible Vashon analysis will look at those different levels because that's what indivisible chapter leaders told us that they wanted to focus on. So as a consequence, we have not looked at, mayoral races, for example. The reason we focus on Attorney General and Governor and Secretary of State is those are the folks who either count the votes or assure that the voters are allowed to vote, particularly secretaries of state. So we feel that those are important elements to include in the recommendations that we make here.
Thank you. And we do have another question now from Mary. She also has a house in New Orleans and is asking, is there any hope anywhere in Louisiana outside NOLA for a progressive? If so, where? Also, when, how do you consider turnout?
Great. Well, we do not consider turnout in terms of our analysis. We can't control turnout. What we largely do in terms of selecting competitive races is we look at people who are professionals at doing that. I wish I could say, hey, I'm a professional at doing that, but I'm not. I'm a systems analyst and I can look at data. But so we look at 4 different ratings organizations, Cook, Center for Politics, Inside Elections, and if they actually get around to it, Decision Desk HQ. When James said last year we were 75% accurate, what we did is we looked at the actual outcome of the last election and we said, how many races were really a toss-up, like within maybe 3%, right? Margin of error, right, on the polling. And then what did the rating agencies say about that race? How many of them said, hey, that race is a toss-up? And so we could actually score the raters. And we did that. And it turns out Cook came out in that election cycle. They came out ahead. So we look at that. We also look at who does swing left, move on, others, who do they support? And then what we do is we say, well, how many competitive races are there in any particular state? And so what we do is we actually have a scoring system. And so you can see California, the reason California, other than Washington, is always our top priority, but you can see California for the 2026 elections, right? That's our second priority. It's because there are a huge number of competitive seats in California. And the reason we think about that is that if you're a volunteer wanting to influence the outcome of a race, you're going to have to learn whatever system those organizations in California have, a texting application or a phone banking application. So if you say, well, I like one race in California and one in Ohio and maybe one in Maine, and then maybe that Oregon race I'm really excited about, you might have to learn 4 different phone banking systems. Some people have the capacity to do that, others don't. So we think about going in and selecting the state that really motivates you or the states, and then focusing. So you asked about Louisiana, right? Is that okay? So I would actually have to go out to a different spreadsheet, and that's what this is for. And let me dive around here. Here's Louisiana right here on row 20. So what we did is we looked at the U.S. House, Senate, Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, the State Senate, and the State House for Louisiana. And you can see there are no green cells here in that row. That means we did not find a single competitive election in Louisiana. Sorry. As much as you'd love to operate there, that's the Mitch McConnell thing. You don't want to go there. Well, maybe you do because your mom lives there and you want to be doing something right to help your mom. So we say that again, our purpose is to identify those competitive races. We do the math so you don't have to, right? We find the volunteer opportunities so you don't spend an hour or two trying to figure out how do I write a postcard to a candidate that I support who's in a really competitive election. We want people who have a couple of hours of time to get right on board and start writing postcards or to start doing texting or phone banking. But you have to realize the limitations of the system that we have. Focus on competitive races. But while we're here, by the way, let me just show you a little bit about Virginia. And I'm going to go to 2025, right, which is over here, 2025 elections. And here's Virginia's row. And here's the state house. This is what is up for grabs in November of this year. And what we did is we looked at what is the mix of Republicans versus Democrats in the Virginia House of Delegates. The Democrats control that chamber by 1 seat. There's 100 seats in the Virginia House of Delegates. The Democrats have 1 seat majority. So when you look at that slide that James showed that have like 7 different House of Delegates members, that's because there's a bunch of them who are Democrats who we need to protect and a couple of seats that are held by Republicans that we want to flip. Okay. So that's why I wanted to show y'all a little bit of information about kind of what's behind this. And Mary, you asked the perfect question to let me go in and kind of dig into that. Okay, if you want to go into the details of kind of all this information, we do not have every state here. But for example, here's the Virginia House of Delegates. We show the election results from the last time. You can see we scored yellow for 1 to 5% win margin. 6 to 10 is in green. You can go down and see where the yellows are in column G. And basically you can say, hey, here's how we picked our candidates who were out there on that spreadsheet. So that's what that's all about. Any other questions on kind of how we approach this?
There was another kind of add-on to that from Mary, asking if there was a ranking for most to least competitive states with kind of the whole breadth of them. And does it match the most gerrymandered, or are there some surprises?
Mary, you need to join our team. Because the Win Elections group, it is not a closed shop. It is definitely open to other folks who want to get involved. But the answer to your question is yes. If I understood your question right, here's the state priorities. What we do for every state is we give the state a score. The score is based on, again, how many competitive elections are there in that state? Because again, somebody might say, I don't care what state. My mom, she doesn't care about politics, or she lives in a blue state already. So just tell me what state's important. Oh, California. Look how many opportunities I have in California. And I just have to maybe learn one system and one organization like grassroots stems, right? So that and California doesn't have a competitive Senate race, so it doesn't get a score from that. It doesn't have a competitive governor, attorney general, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't get a score boost from that, but it has all of those House seats. And so California comes out on top because of that. And so what we do is every time we go in, every month we look at this and make an adjustment. And you can see that here on rows 8 and 9, it used to be that Ohio was ahead of Iowa, and now Iowa is ahead of Ohio. If you look at our matrix, we didn't flip that because you can see the scores are really pretty close. There wasn't a dramatic shift, but here's what will change things. When the gerrymandering wars settle out, we're going to see where the competitive races are after that. And that is a huge disruptor, by the way, to our process, because we like to look back at the last competitive election. When you redraw the maps, you lose that history, right? That history is no longer applicable. So that's how we try to do our best job of kind of keeping up with what's really happening out there and what should go into this matrix. Okay, any other questions, Meg, for me?
I think that's it for the questions so far.
Okay. Okay, so then let's proceed. So let's say that you really care about California Proposition 50, which is basically the vote that will be in California to allow that state to redistrict to compete with Texas. In the Texas, if you go out and look at these raters, there's like 3 seats that they're saying will go from a Democrat to a Republican. And there's a fourth one in Texas that they say is, likely to flip. So you can see the damage that's already been done by that process. But anyway, if you care about any one of these columns, you should basically go down the list here and down this column and say, hey, here's a green cell, here's a green, here's a green. And that means that every one of these organizations over here has something that you can do to support Proposition 50. And if you go over here, you can see that this little menu opened up. So that's a postcarding with Activate America. You click on that, and basically, if they're still postcarding, because we update this like once a week, that's what I mentioned, the volunteers, right? How often they jump in. Um, it basically should say, hey, here should be some postcarding. And right here, California's crucial redistricting effort. You can see they have also got New Jersey governor and the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, which is also on our list of focus areas. So again, right now you can go out to this web page and say, hey, I want to get postcards. So if we go back here, the other thing that we'll do on this matrix, let me jump down to this, is in some cases it's like, hey, I'm going to put a link right in here so you can go right to the California Prop 50 vote forward. But generally, if you see a green cell, the idea is to go over here and click on that. And then again, Postcards with Grassroots Stems is another organization. And of course, they're being really active in California because that's where they're based. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to make sure to cover? I think, oh, that's a little timer that says we're about 5 minutes away from your 40 minutes that you wanted us to focus on. The only other thing I'd say is, James, I know that you planning some canvassing activities, and maybe you've got some other things you'd like to put into the conversation.
Well, first on what you have on the screen right now, I just want to highlight, in the introduction, I was saying I view this work as being in service of others. So this gets updated on about a weekly basis. Fast forward less than a year from now, it'll probably be getting updated every few days. because things are going to change with the midterms. And so if you grew up in Ohio and you want to do something in Ohio, there's no green squares. Wait a week, there could be green squares. So if you all decide to disseminate this information to the rest of your colleagues in Indivisible there in Olympia, this tool could almost be like a one-stop shop. You get up in the morning, you're like, I've got 30 minutes today, I want to do something. You can go right to this matrix, click on it, open it up, look for a green box, and find out if you like to postcard, then look for a postcarding opportunity. If you like to phone bank, look for phone banking. Just trying to make it as easy for users to help them maximize the amount of time they have to dedicate to doing something for democracy. Make it easier for them to do that. Yeah, we're doing an effort here from the island for Deb K over on the peninsula. We're taking advantage of something that's really nice here on the island. King County has placed 3 metro commuter vans on the island for our use, not just Indivisible, but anybody on the island. And so we've made reservations for the van. We've invited people from Seattle. We've invited people from Tacoma. We'll pick them up at a set location to go canvass for Deb between now and the November 4th election, trying to get as many people out there to support Deb's campaign. Kevin kind of already covered phone banking, lots of phone banking opportunities. You see a lot of white, obviously, because it's 2025. There's just not that much right now outside of the state. So.
And yes, James, as you mentioned, as we roll into 2026, we are going to, of course, see other organizations who are adding opportunities, and those white cells, when they turn green, when our volunteers find an opportunity, then we'll go ahead and add that to the matrix. So there are ways to contribute to this. Go ahead, James. You had
Well, I was just going to say, and kudos and thank yous to our volunteers, because it involves going out to each individual campaign, finding information out from their website, making phone calls to find out what opportunities exist so that we can get them into the matrix. And as we're learning, campaign managers are as varied as any other discipline. And so some are great at getting their opportunities out there on their website, easy to find, and others are less so.
Yes. And we didn't spend a lot of time on Take Action Network, but we also, for example, when we reach out and talk to a candidate's organization, if they post their volunteer opportunities in a certain location, then we can add them into Take Action Network. And if you go out to TAN, I'm showing you that my TAN screen right now. And up here, when you click in the magnifying glass, which is the search, and I typed in Abigail, and this is elect Abigail Spanberger. And basically, if you click on that, you will find that there's a bunch of opportunities to support Abigail. And what if you are a TAN member and you sign up in TAN and say, hey, I want to hear about new opportunities for Abigail, you get an email that says, hey, guess what? Here's a new thing that you can do to support Abigail. So we're trying to make these resources accessible in a lot of different ways. The other thing I want to make sure to mention is that we've talked about the level of detail, the level of that we go to in terms of identifying candidates, president, Congress, state legislatures, attorney general, governor, secretary of state. We also, if there's an indivisible chapter that says, I have a really important, super competitive election in my district that I want help from other indivisible chapters, this resource can also work for you. I tell everybody that, it would be like sort of shameful for me to put, Pramila Jayapal into this system because, she's going to like get 85% of the vote. That's not a competitive race. Um, but if there's a super important race, there is not a limitation in terms of, right, how this system, this resource can be able to capture that. And we can add in other opportunities. But what I ask is that the indivisible chapter that has that race, they do the work. They reach out to the candidate. You should be doing that anyway, of course. They reach out to the campaign and they join us in this work. The other thing that can be done is to help um, reach out to those indivisible chapters across the country, develop those relationships. So we have that. Mary, the questions you're asking is all about like the analytics behind this and kind of where do we focus our time and why do we do that? And that's an ongoing conversation that people can participate in if you would like to be involved in the work. So this Win Elections group is, like I say, not a closed shop. It's opportunity for people to get involved. And if you're looking for another way to spend several hours of your month supporting a good cause, so there's always that. And I guess what I should do is maybe just go into, if I can control this the right way, I want to allow us to do some closure. So James, I think this is your closing remarks at the convening. Basically, again, in summary, we focus on the most competitive races. When we say we align those with our values and strategy, it means we listen to what indivisible chapters at the gathering said are their priorities. Congress, no surprise. That's how Indivisible got formed, was around the first Trump administration. Um, the Indivisible Vashon homepage is where you find those resources. We are not, I've mentioned that if anybody else wants to replicate this stuff on your website, go for it. We are not holding this close to our vest. We want to get this out and about. But this is at least one place, and they're all a bunch of Google Docs, yeah, actually. So it's pretty easy to put this stuff out on your website if you want. But on the other hand, this is a one place for people to go. Indivisible Vashon, click the banner, get to the page. And then, as James mentioned, we do this on a regular basis to update and Take Action Network, where we can find candidates who have their content in the right place for Take Action Network to find. And unfortunately, if they don't, then TAN can't find it. So we cannot use that service, but we, of course, include them in the matrix and on the candidates page. So trying to get the word out lots of different ways. And for your members who want to chat and say, hey, what's this all about? Tell me a little bit more. I had a question. I couldn't make it. There's our phone numbers. Go ahead and give us a call. I love talking about this stuff. James, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think Kevin and I have struggled. I think that's a fair way to put it. With a lot of users struggle with some of this data and how to access it and how to use it. And so if y'all propagate this and share it with all of your members, I think the simplest way to do it is just the matrix. Look for the state you're interested in. If you have some affiliation with a state through a family, through friends, whatever, and look for the green. And Kevin has a phrase that I parrot quite a bit when people say, what should I do? How can I help? The answer to that question is do the thing you're going to do. So if there's a green box in postcarding and you never want to write a postcard, then don't sign up to say you're going to write a postcard because you're not going to write the postcard. But if you love to be on the phone and there's a phone banking opportunity, click on the phone banking. So people don't have to really understand all the work that goes in the background to produce this. I'm trying to think of ways to make it, a 1 or 2 or 3 click visit. Indivisible Vashon, Matrix. I'm interested in Ohio. Are there opportunities? Nope. Okay, I'm interested in Florida. Yeah, there's an opportunity. Come back in a week, maybe there's an opportunity in Ohio. So trying to make it as accessible for people, I think is really important. Um, and hopefully the Matrix helps people with that.
Okay. Any other questions for us?
We have a handful of questions that came in. First one from John. Are campaign contributions included in any way? If not, were they considered?
We don't directly look at who has raised more money. We have in some cases done that. We also used to look at polling data. We also used to look at assessments of candidates' approval ratings. Some of those have fallen away because they're now behind paywalls, or we found that they're not really the effective way to look at the problem. But in some cases, we will go and look at how candidates are doing in terms of fundraising. The reason we don't include that metric in every case is that we're looking at organizations like Cook Political Report, Swing Left, Move On, and others who have the capacity to do more analysis than we do. And so bottom line is we're really looking at largely what other groups are focusing on. We do that crowdsourcing, and when Move On and Swing Left and Grassroots Dems and are all focusing on Wisconsin 3, for example, it's like, okay, that's got to be a good place for us to put our effort. And whether or not there's a monetary advantage to one of the other candidates, we figure that those other organizations have probably taken a look at that. So I wish I could say we were more, had more of that expert analysis, but we don't have that capacity within ourselves. But we look at groups who have proven to us that they have a great track record of doing that, and then we can assemble the data to show you what we found.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Jeff, which was, do you have any data on who's using the matrix outside of Washington?
Well, that we have got some feedback that people outside of Washington have said, we really appreciate the fact you're including us in your matrix. But no, we don't. We do have web tracking, right, in terms of how many people click on what parts of our website. I would say that that is some analytics that we don't on a regular basis focus on. And I don't believe we would have any way to determine which of those clicks are from Washington State and which of the clicks are from some other state. But I can tell you that reaching out to those other indivisible chapters across the state, particularly if they have a statewide organization like WIN, and several, New York does, Illinois, California has like two or three. We're trying to build relationships there so that we can make sure that they not only that we follow their lead, but also that they are aware of this as a resource too. And at the convening, I know James and um, Ezra talked. Ezra seemed quite excited about this. There was a possibility that we talk to some of their national staff, and I think we're still waiting for that phone call. So maybe we should pick up the
Yes.
phone to Ezra again.
Great, thank you. We have a couple more questions here. Mary wanted to know, do you ever do or think about doing initiatives or referenda, like big ones that set back progressive policies or priorities a lot?
Well, we definitely focus on the Washington State initiatives. So if I think that's his name, if he is successful again, then we will add initiatives into the Get Out the Vote matrix, and we will add initiatives on the candidates and initiatives page, which is, we didn't show you that. You can get to the Get Out the Vote resource and click there. You're going to basically find the different states, the different activities, and the different candidates and how to donate to them. And if they have a mobilized page, you'll be able to link to their mobilized page. So if you want to forget California, I want to do California 41, you can do that by going to the candidates page. So Mary, that's a great question because if we see that there are I can envision things like legislation in a state to preserve voting rights. which is pretty important for us. There might be phone banking opportunities to really influence the outcome of that kind of an initiative or kind of a policy position. So I would say this resource has the capacity to do that. Part of our challenge is, again, if the menu gets too gigantic, right, it's like, oh, everybody's eyes roll back in their head. I'm not going to go. It gives me a headache just to look at it. But that's part of the conversation that we have is what are the priorities? What do we see as our values? And how can we be influential in trying to get the outcome we want? And that's part of what this process is all about.
Thank you for that. And then we also had a question here from Susan. And I apologize, my screen just got a little funny here. Okay. And from Susan, she said, given the growing resistance, might you change your 5% margin rule? Just looking at Florida race where Trump won by 30% and Dems lost by only 10%.
So it depends on which direction we might want to change that, Susan. There's the reason to change that number to be smaller is there's just less things on the menu. We're sensitive about people and overwhelming them with too many opportunities. We also only have a certain amount of space on the screen. So if we make that number larger, then we just have more and more content. We place more demands on our volunteers to go find opportunities. So that's another capacity issue. So we haven't really talked about that. But here's what I have done is I went back, we've looked at uh, all the election results back at the last election cycle. And so we know what the win margin is. And I wish I had the numbers at the top of my head, but I said, if we can get a 10% swing, how many House seats are we going to pick up? Right? How many Senate seats are we going to pick up if we get a 10% swing just based on the last election? Um, and it's a nice number. I just can't remember what it is. And maybe Meg, what I'll do is go back to that analysis and send it your way. Um, but those are some of the considerations. I don't think I answer your question, but those are some of the things we think about.
Thank you. And that kind of concludes the questions that, had been put up in the chat. So if we're done with the presentation, thank you so much. And Mary, you can take it away.